So on this homework assignment, we're doing the odd ones. It says right here 1 through 13 odd. So we're going to do those. Number one, we just need to plug in our values. So let's first start by rewriting number one without the z. Just let's leave a blank spot in there. So notice that I left parentheses in place of the z. Now I'm going to take my z value of -4 and plug it right in there. Then after that, I'm going to zoom in and actually work this out. So remember, this is not an equation. We're just going to simplify it. So inside the absolute values, we have a 2 times -4 plus 1. So 2 times -4 is -8. And you could bring down the plus 1. And of course, we still have the big absolute values that this is still in. And we still have the minus sign and the 16 out here in the front. So we're still working on the inside of the absolute values. We have -8 plus 1. That's going to be a -7 inside the absolute values. So we have the minus, we have the 16 out here. Now, remember, do not, I repeat, do not change this to a plus plus. These are not parentheses. If they were parentheses, yeah, you would change it to a plus plus. That would be a +7. But in this case, you have to actually think, what is the absolute value of -7? What is the absolute value of -7? That's +7. So you just bring down the 7, and then you bring down the 16, and you bring down the minus sign. So what you really have is 16 take away 7, so the final answer is 9. That's your answer for number 1, 9. Again, do not make the mistake of changing the minus to plus plus. Don't do that. If it were parentheses instead of the absolute value, you would change it. So that's number 1. Expect to see something like that on the quiz Friday. Number 3, there's the setup. Notice I rewrote my absolute values and I rewrote everything. You have a -3, there it is. The y, I put parentheses. The z, you don't have to put parentheses. I'm just going to leave a blank spot. The x, I put parentheses. And now I'm actually going to go back and, check the values that I need to plug in. So x is -1, y is 3. So x is -1, y is 3, and z is -4. So now we could go back in and work on this. Inside we have -3 times 3, that is a -9. And then we could bring down the plus and also bring down the -4. And let's bring down the absolute values. And we also have the -1, which is going to change to a +1. So you really have a +1 on the outside. So we're going to continue working on the inside of the absolute value. -9 minus 4, that's -13. So we really have the absolute value of -13 plus 1. And we all should know that the absolute value of -13 is 13, and 13 plus 1 is 14. So 14 is your final answer for number 3. Expect to see that on the test Friday. Quiz, sorry, not test, it's a quiz. Let's jump to the next odd one, number 5. Now remember, guys, on each of these, you're going to be setting up a positive situation and a negative situation. And I usually put a squiggly line right between it to separate my work. So on the positive situation, we have to write it exactly the way it is without the absolute values. Notice it's the same exact thing, except these absolute values, they're no longer there. I just wrote it without it. Now the negative situation, all you do is write it exactly the same without the absolute values and slap on a negative onto the right side. Make that a -1 for the negative situation. So let me rewrite it. 2z minus 9 equals a -1. That's the only thing you do to switch it from a positive situation to a negative situation. And of course, we have to solve each of these guys. So let's just zoom into the positive situation. Let's do that. And how do we do that? Well, we're going to add 9 to both sides to get rid of that -9. And we bring down the 2 and the z, the equal sign, and 10. And then we're going to divide by 2 to get rid of the 2 in front of the z. Divide by 2, what you do to one side, do to the other. Z equals 5. That is your answer for the positive situation. So now that you solved that one, let's go to the negative situation. And let's solve this one. Okay, so that's going to be +9. Plus 9, what do we have left? We have a 2z, we have the equal sign, and we have an 8. because if you owe $1 and you have $9, you could pay off that person that you owe $1 and you still have 8 left over. Now, of course, you want to get rid of that multiplication of 2 in front of the z, divide by 2. What you do to one side, do to the other. Z equals 4. There's your other answer. So we truly have 2 answers for this question on number 5. The answer is 5 and 4. Now, like I said before, on the worksheets, they have this number line that they want you to plot your answers on. I'm not going to ask you to plot your answers on the test, but let's might as well do it on this one. They have the answers 5 and 4. So there are my answers, and I put them with the appropriate color right there. Z was 5, put that in blue. Z is 4, put that in red. So on the test, I'm not going to have you do this part, but I will have you give me both of these answers. You have to write both. If you give me one answer only, you're only going to get half credit because it's 2 answers that I need for this one problem. Moving on to number 7, since we're doing the odd ones. Let's set up the positive and negative situations. The positive situation is writing it exactly the way it is, of course, except for the absolute values. In the negative situation is writing it exactly the way it is without the absolute values and changing that 9 to a negative 9. So then you just go through and solve both of them. Let's solve the positive situation first by getting rid of the plus 6 by doing the opposite, minus 6. What you do to one side, do to the other. You're going to rewrite it. You're going to have 3t equals 3. 9 take away 6 is 3. Final step would be to get rid of that multiplication of 3 in front of the t. I'm going to divide by 3, cancels out, t equals 1. So t equals 1 is the answer right there. On the other side, we're also going to subtract 6, and what you do to one side, you do to the other. Of course, the 6's cancel. We're going to rewrite it. There's a 3t left over. There's an equal sign left over. Negative 9, take away 6. You owe somebody $9. You owe somebody $6. You're going to owe them 15 altogether. So my final step to get rid of that 3 in front would be to divide by 3. Divide by 3. T equals negative 5. So those are our 2 answers for this problem. And of course, let's plot the points, even though I'm not going to ask you to do this on the test. Negative 5 and 1. Moving on. On number 9 here, we do need these notes that I passed out yesterday. It says additional notes, writing an absolute value equation given the solutions on a number line. So what we need to do is set up the absolute values. X minus the midpoint equals the distance from a point to the midpoint. Okay, so yesterday we handed this out. We had these 2 solutions. You find the midpoint by going in 1, going in 2, going in 3, going in 4, and you end up with that midpoint of 2. So the value that goes for the midpoint is 2. So you're going to do absolute values, which is right here. The x is right there minus the midpoint, and the midpoint happens to be 2, so you bring that down. And then over here is the number that's the distance from a point to the midpoint. So pick any point, 6 or negative 2, and count how far it is from the midpoint. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 4 units, or same thing this way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 units. So that's the number, the distance from the point to the midpoint. That's the number that belongs out here. So we're going to use the same notes from yesterday to write these equations. So once again, let's do the setup. We have absolute value of x minus the midpoint, and then equals, and over here belongs the distance from the point to the midpoint. So let's first find out what the midpoint is, and let's do that by counting from here and finding the middle point. So if I go 1 unit in, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units, obviously 6 is the midpoint. 6 is the midpoint. So I'm going to actually write down in here the value 6, because that's what belongs inside the absolute value of the midpoint. So there's my midpoint. Now, the number that goes out here on our notes from yesterday, it says the distance from a point to the midpoint. So let's go to this point right here. How far is it from the midpoint? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this outside value is going to be 5. Because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units away. And that's your equation. That's it. Now, it didn't matter if you went from the 11 to the midpoint or from the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the same thing to the midpoint. It's 5 units away. 5 units. So it doesn't matter which point you pick. When you count to the midpoint, it's going to be the same distance. And the distance from the point to the midpoint is the value that goes out here. And this is your equation that will actually produce the answers 1 and 11. Let's take a look at number 11 here. Once again, let's set it up. You have your absolute value. You have x minus the midpoint. So let's first find the midpoint by counting. We go one in, we go another, we go another. So the midpoint is right here, -3. So -3 is the midpoint. -3. So -3 belongs right in here. And then it says equals what? It equals the distance from a point to the midpoint. So let's find out what that distance is from the point to the midpoint. It's 1, 2, 3, 4. Or from this way, it doesn't matter. 1, 2, 3, 4. Distance is always positive. So that is a +4. Why? Because it's 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units to the midpoint. And that's your answer right there. All you got to do is put the plus, x plus 3 inside of the absolute values equals 4. There's your absolute value equation that will give you both answers, -7 and +1, as a solution. -7 plus 3, it is -4, and the absolute value of -4 is 4. So -7 works. 1, if you plug in 1 right there, 1 plus 3 is 4. The absolute value of 4 is 4, so that one works. So you see how this equation actually produces these answers? So I've explained every single question on the homework, minus number 13. We're not going to do that. I'm not going to put that word problem on the quiz Friday. So you should be ready to go. Of course, you should practice all of them. Go back and try to do 6 through 12 even, and check your answers on the back of the worksheet.